Let's see.
So we should be live somewhere on here. I
Yep.
see it
Yep.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah, share
So
that out.
what's our study today?
1 Timothy 5 is where we're picking up.
I thought we got through that. Okay, no problem.
See, I could set up a third stream, and I thought about streaming to our Twitter, or X, or I thought about, I have a channel set up on Rumble. I've just never done anything with it. Yeah, I thought about sending a stream there, but I don't know.
I don't like this. Well, don't like that.
I think. You know.
Yes or no?
What's that? Oh, yeah. Do we let him in or not? Pay the toll. I heard something the other day I thought was interesting. You know, when you look at Paul's letters to Titus, and we've talked about this a little bit, he doesn't address qualifications for deacons. And the reason was put forth that is because they didn't yet have elders, and he was supposed to go appoint elders. And so there wasn't really a need for qualifications for deacons until he got the elders appointed. Well, that's interesting.
I have a friend who says if it were not for Timothy's qualifications for deacons, and that one of the books, maybe it's 1 Corinthians, talks about the saints and elders and deacons, that he would think that.
Yeah, that's Philippians. Philippians 1.
Philippians. He would think that it was just the word servant, and not a, as we say, an office or a specific appointment, but he says those two things, kind of show that it's something special. You guys probably already talked about all that.
Well, I think
I was gone for quite a while.
You're laying around for a while. One of the things I think we touched on is that it may be that deacons are going to be trusted more with certain things that would require them to be not just faithful to the Lord, but trustworthy in their responsibilities. But I think any member of the church that is given a task, because this is where we have to be careful, and I haven't heard anyone push this, that if you're not serving in the official capacity as a deacon, that you really can't do anything for the church. But everyone can do something in help of the support of the local congregation. There's always something to be done. But whoever it is still needs to be godly anyway, trustworthy and so forth. But I thought that was interesting. He didn't give the instructions for deacons because Crete did not have elders yet. So no. All right. Here in a minute, we're going to be picking up with 1 Timothy chapter 5. Oh, I got to turn on the Facebook social so I can follow it.
Oh.
All right, let that update. All right, there's a few more people with us. All right, any pre-thoughts on this before we get into it, before we start the study?
We're on chapter 5 now.
Yep, 1 Timothy.
I don't remember finishing 4, but that was like weeks ago.
Exactly. Let me mute this real quick. Okay.
Good thought.
All right. All right, everyone, we will fade out and be right back. Welcome back to another Truth Factor discussion. Here in just a moment, we will continue our study through 1 Timothy. We are picking up in chapter 5, verse 1. I'd like to thank you so much for joining us for our study today. We already have some who have chimed in. We have Stephanie and Jimmy, as well as David. We'd love to hear from you if maybe this is the first time you've joined us for a live study. If you don't mind just telling us who you are and just the general locale where you're from, if you would like. If you're Bob from Minnesota or wherever, say hi. If you have any thoughts or comments, we welcome you to share them with us during the course of our study on our YouTube channel. You'll have the chat area there on our Facebook page where this live stream is also. Of course, you'll have the comment section too. You can also send us emails, send in questions at truthfactor.com. Or, as you see on the screen, email us individually, paul@tom@truthfactor.com. We would definitely love to hear from you. Good morning, gentlemen. Y'all doing well today? All right.
Doing great.
Yep, doing okay.
Before we get into the study, Brian's not here with us today. His son, Grant, is undergoing chemotherapy, and Brian goes with him. And so there will be probably several studies where that treatment falls at our time or this time slot. So Brian won't be able to be with us for that. Please keep Grant and Brian and the whole Haynes families in your prayers as he undergoes these treatments to help overcome the cancer. And so definitely keep him in our thoughts and our prayers. Yeah. Brendan said he might be in. He's having some things to take care of, so we'll see if his maybe becomes a reality. All right. So we left off, 3 weeks ago, right before Christmas. Left off with having concluded the chapter 4 of 1 Timothy. And so we're picking up in chapter 5 here. What's interesting about this chapter, as Paul continues, is that he deals with something that ultimately, what's very interesting, it shows a common problem that they faced during that time period and might address issues that we have today. I mean, we have different retirement accounts, and if someone is a widow, there may be more opportunities for them to be provided for. And we'll make this point as we get through here. In a kind of a secondary lesson to this, we're going to find an interesting case in point that shows us there are certain things that the individual can do that the church cannot do. And we'll talk about that as we get through there, kind of a small point regarding the subject of authority. But it definitely sets a clear example of not everything the individual can do in the local church, the church itself can do collectively. And again, side point, but we'll look at that as we get there. Let's start. I'm trying to see what would be a good division here. Let's look at verses 1 and 2 by themselves. I'll read that real quick, and then we will then get on into verse 3 and following. Notice here, Paul writes, and this is New King James translation, 1 Timothy chapter 1, "Do not rebuke an older man, but exhort him as a father, younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, younger women as sisters, with all purity." This is a very important admonition that Paul gives to Timothy. When you think about the structure of the local congregation, you're going to have in most congregations some level of variety here in regards to ages. And let's talk about that for just a few minutes here. In regards to the older man in verse 1 there, Paul tells Timothy to exhort him as a father. What does that kind of bring with it, when we have that type of mindset? Any thoughts?
One of the things when I see this verse, it's just the reminder that we have to remember that we're a family, and God wants us to be a family. And by the way, He wants us to be not a dysfunctional family, but He wants us to be a family the way that He has described the family makeup. What we might describe as the ideal family, and so I think that's what lends into this is, as a church we can't be we can't be so formal that we forget the human element that's associated with our relationship. We need to have that bond and that relationship. And one of the things that comes to my mind as I say that, as you read through much of the New Testament, many of the letters deal with Christians facing persecutions and sufferings of one sort or another. And one of the points that I often bring out when I deal with those passages is to remind us that in a world that is increasingly more and more hostile against God and the faith, we desperately need each other. And the only way that's going to work is if we treat each other with the love and respect that God wants us to have. Treat each other like we are really a family, not just a family in word, but I mean, you need to be as close to your brethren as you are to your physical family in a way, you know. And so that's my thoughts.
All right. Paul or Caleb?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think here there's a respect that is due fellow Christians, that the older men are to be exhorted. It's like, don't ignore them and don't just let them get by with anything, I guess. But in the encouragement, in even if there would be correction that was needed, that it would be done in a very respectful way. The older women as mothers, and then younger men and younger women as siblings, that you would treat them with the respect that you would anticipate treating your own physical family, or maybe even better, depending on what kind of relationship you have with your physical family.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's interesting. You read the New King James. See, in the New American Standard, he says, "Do not sharply rebuke." But if you look up that Greek word that they translate, "do not sharply," it's only used right here. It's used one time in the whole New Testament. It's right. It's in this passage. The Greek word is epipleso, is how you say it. But it means to chastise. That is with word, or to unbrand or rebuke. So it's interesting that he uses that specific word. So that doesn't mean we don't correct them if they're wrong, but do it in a way that denotes, you know, they should have respect for their age. We correct people differently based on respect and their age and who they are, and he even, you know, implies that when you're dealing with younger people, you don't look down on them, but you treat them as brothers. And we're supposed to appeal to people, you know, with that in mind. There's a natural respect you have for somebody that's a father or somebody that's older, and doesn't mean you don't correct them when they're wrong, but you do it in a way that's pleasing to God and not, you know, harshness. But, you know, you can appeal to people that are older that know better. You know, they should know better.
Yeah.
And so you might be able to appeal to them in a different way than you can a young person that doesn't know any better. And of course, you know, Proverbs says a soft answer turns away wrath. So we got to be, you know, be soft about it sometimes and use it. There's different ways to approach different people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Great point there, Caleb. One other point on that I think is worthy of emphasis, especially on verse 2, is the qualifier associated with younger women. You know, treat your younger women as sisters with all purity. You know, you do not take advantage of a young woman, or you don't take advantage of anybody. But the point is Paul's making this reminder because obviously, I know it's a problem today. You know, in some circumstances, and obviously it was a problem back then as well. So make sure that you are pure in your dealings with women. You know, as a man, you know, which is why I don't know what your all's policies are, but I do my best not to be alone with another woman. You know, even if it's a study in a congregation, I want at least a couple of women there at least, and even that's not the ideal circumstance. But the point the point is remember purity as you're dealing with others.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that would be like First Thessalonians 5:22. You avoid all the appearance of evil. Avoid every appearance of evil as you can, and that's just wise. I think it's interesting when you start, looking for cross references in verse 1. They make a note that Leviticus 19:32 is the law of God in the Old Testament, that we're supposed to respect those older than us, and that's a commandment that we have to follow. So it's interesting that some of these things that Paul reiterates to the New Testament Christians, he gets from the Old Testament. These things haven't changed. God doesn't change, but Paul reiterates it here to Timothy, that we should have respect for those who are older and how we deal with them.
I think there is two things to say about this. I agree with what you're all saying. Let's add something to this, though he doesn't directly state it. I think there's an implication regarding the brotherly love. You think about the brotherly love that we see within the scriptures, a little bit different than the agape love, but yet we're to love one another as brothers. So if that love is there, then the proper treatment will be there, whether, like you've already said, the elderly, or for the younger. And this aspect of treat the younger women as sisters with all purity. If you have the right type of love for them, this family type love, because we are, as you've already pointed out, brethren with Christ, then you'll have the proper attitude and actions towards them. The other thought on that, or go ahead, Paul, if you got something on that.
I was just going to say it's interesting to look at this relationship and how it's to be handled when you look at what Timothy says about this in kind of a parallel in Timothy 2. He doesn't focus so much on the attitude as what kind of exhortation or what kind of doctrine you're to encourage them to be. Older men to be sober, reverent, temperate, sound in faith and love and patience. Older women, he gives some things for them. The young women, how they're to behave, and the young men, then down in verse 6 of that. And so it's just interesting that, Timothy, Paul tells him, here's the attitude to have, the family relationship. But Titus, when he writes to him, it's make sure that you encourage the older men in this way, and the older women in this way, and young women and young men. And he actually gives the kinds of teaching that each of those categories may specifically need.
Those are Titus 2.
Yeah, Titus 2. If I didn't say that, I'm sorry. Titus 2, like verses 1 through 6 or so.
Yeah, that's a good point.
7, 8.
Yeah, that's a good point. The other thing that's kind of thrown there with what Tom was talking about, there are three things to keep in mind. Three things to keep in mind. And I say as a preacher, I think this would apply to any man in the congregation. If there's a situation where you may be alone with a female member of the congregation, here's the three cautionary standpoints. To Caleb, I'm going to take what you said and kind of make it last for just a moment. Okay. The first is know your own heart and your temptations. It may be that due to a man's specific weaknesses, and maybe what he is attracted to, and his lack of self-control or whatever, that may be a good reason never to encounter or never allow that situation to develop. The other thing is, what about the person with whom you happen to be having the meeting? All right. Is there anything about them that would create a dangerous situation in regards towards you? There have been preachers who would go in to do family counseling to married couples, and they would meet with each one individually. Well, if you have a woman who's in an unhappy relationship, and here you have the sweet preacher who's showing her kind attention and giving her affirmation and so forth, that's setting up for trouble. So you have to be wise on that account too. And then the third one, Caleb, like what you're talking about, if sometimes if you were meeting alone with a woman and just members had to come by the building and they would see y'all both coming out of the office, we would say, well, they shouldn't assume anything. But sometimes you cannot help what other people think, and you have to exercise caution in that respect too. So it's not just about how it looks. It's you got to know your own weaknesses and maybe be aware of the other person as well. Gets kind of personal, but.
Yeah, and you say you talked about the appearance, the third thing. I'll tell you a short story here. My dad, I guess this is probably even before I was born. My dad was preaching in northern Florida at a location, and a lady drove by another woman's house and saw the car in front of her house. And so she goes to mom and says, "You realize that your husband is not being faithful to you?" And he said, "I saw the car in front of so-and-so's house." To which my mom replied, "Oh, I was the one that was there." Brethren jump to conclusions, right or wrong. And the point is, but anything that we can do, abstain from every appearance of evil. The First Thessalonians 5 and verse number 2, and I think that's an example of what you're talking about there. I think that King James says abstain from every form of evil, and I don't think that's a good translation of that, because it is the idea of if something appears to be evil, or can leave that impression, avoid it. Do your best. Do your best to avoid that type of a circumstance.
Well, sometimes you just can't help certain situations, like what you're talking about.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Years ago, congregation we were at, my office was up front. Okay, meaning to one side of the baptistry, so it's view of everybody. And there was a young lady there. She was more of a visitor, but family relation there. And so she had a question for me. And so we just stepped back to my office. Doors open, everything. We're just back there for just a few minutes for services. And I think I was showing her something from commentary. So I can't remember now what it was. But anyway, just maybe 4 or 5 minutes at the most. So we came out. And just one of the men in the congregation turned and looked at Rhonda like, do you see that? See that? And certain things you can't help in the way people respond. But if you know the situation is going to be something that could create something, you just got to be wise. And this is what we're talking about. I'm getting ready to take us way off subject, so I won't stay there very long. Tom, I had a preacher years ago explain to me about the text in 1 Thessalonians. There's another way of looking at it, and I'd have to go back and verify the Greek. That way of looking at that is when it says, like in the King James, a form of evil, not so much how you look, but if you were to look up and see evil coming, make sure that you abstain from what you see there, to avoid that. So I've always explained it kind of both ways. If you see evil coming, you abstain from it, you get away from it. But at the same time, if what you're about to do looks like you're doing evil, then you need to stay away from that as well. But sometimes we don't even think about that,
Yeah, and that's true. Just with a quick look up, though, I just did a search of the word form. The Greek word eidos, and it's the same word as 2 Corinthians 5:7. We walk by faith, not by sight. And a couple of others. The appearance of Jesus was altered, Luke 9:29, and as far as transfiguration. So when I see that, it seems to me to be what something looks like outwardly, and I'm just throwing that out as something to think about with that. So
yeah, I'm not saying that's not the right meaning or not an applicable meaning, but just throwing out there a possible. Yeah,
and that's the one thing about the Bible. I think there's a lot of things that are written in the Bible, where there are multiple applications. There are multiple things that are associated with what you're saying. I mean, you've got that idea of as evil is presenting itself. As evil appears, avoid it. Amen. Matter of fact, that is a form of evil, from that standpoint. So I think it would almost fit as a subcategory.
It's a New King James. I'm sorry, that says form of evil. My bad.
Yeah. No, I know the New King James says, yeah, every form of evil. Yeah, every form of
Yeah.
evil. Yeah.
So
And
it's
I think
the
it was the
ESV.
Yeah.
Yeah, ESV, New American Standard. I think even the NIV say all use form.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the King James that says appearance.
That's it.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Speaking of appearances, so we don't appear to go off track too far. Unless there's any thoughts or comments, we'll continue. Well, actually, we do have a couple comments real fast. I'm sorry. Got distracted on that, my distraction there. This is a good point. David Clark writes, I was taught to respect all older people, not just in the church, but everywhere. I think that's a very valid point. In general, we need to be teaching our young people to have a respect for the elderly. Within the church, for Timothy, dealing with other members especially, but in general, yeah. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that, in the context here, he's talking about in the church.
Yeah.
That would be more of appeal to let your light shine, be the salt of the earth. That we should be that way towards everyone. Respect people, respect their opinions, try and answer the questions, and be respectful as you can. Of course, that's the general rule, right? Titus chapter 3 talks about dealing with divisiveness. So there is like situations where you have to just walk away. You deal more harshly with people that are being divisive.
Yeah.
So, but these are general rules. But I do think that's a good point that if you're doing that with people in the church and you're doing that all the time, then naturally you'll do that outside as well, and that'll help your light shine.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. Yeah. All right. Any thoughts? All right, let's go ahead and start with verse 3. And Caleb, I'm going to have you to read. We're going to break it up just a little bit let's go verses 3 through 8. And
Okay.
Let me bring up the New American Standard. All right, whenever you are ready, sir.
Okay. Verse 3 there in chapter 5, he says, honor widows who are widows indeed. But if any widow has a children or grandchildren, they must first learn to practice piety in regard to their own family and to make some return to their parents, for this is acceptable in the sight of God. Now she who is a widow indeed and who has been left alone has fixed her hope on God and continues in entreaties and prayers night and day. But she who gives herself to a wanton pleasure is dead even while she lives. Prescribe these things as well as that they may be above reproach. But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he is denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever.
You know what? I never noticed that, Caleb. A widow can't enjoy wontons.
Yeah.
Isn't that a food?
I think so. Yeah.
Wonton.
Yeah, did I butcher
yeah.
that?
No, you're all right.
Wonton, yeah.
I said that. There's
I
a
knew
new
when
one
I
there.
said that doesn't sound right, but I just kept going.
That's all right. Jimmy made a comment, and I failed to bring it in real quick before we get into the section. He said, I think it's just general, not just amongst preachers. It's in business and everything else in life. Great point. You're talking about how to deal with the older, the younger. Yeah, I think that's a very good point, Jimmy. Yeah. All right, Caleb, when he brings this up here, honor widows who are widows indeed. He's about to explain for us what he means by the term widows indeed. Okay, so what would be the general summary there that he's laying down someone who is a true or a widow indeed?
Yeah, so I think he's given you the exceptions to widows following verse 3, but verse 3 clearly I think he's talking about women who don't have anybody else to take care of them. That they are dependent on the church and the church family to take care of them. They don't have children, or their children have abandoned them. They are all alone. And we have some of the church here that are that way, and we have a responsibility to check on them and take care of them. But if they have family, then their family has an obligation to take care of them. And of course, that's true, in the Jewish culture. That's one thing that Jesus, reprimands the Pharisees for giving all their money to the temple and say, well, we can't take care of our family because, we gave all our money to God. Well, no, there's a responsibility we have as individuals and as family members. And then the church has a responsibility to those who don't have anybody else. So I think a widow indeed is somebody that is by themselves, that they are truly alone.
Yeah. What is interesting about what he says in verse 4 is basically this is an opportunity for the family to behave godly or piety towards their elderly members. The younger towards the older, and make the return there. This is what God expects of them. If they have an older person, take care of them.
Right.
Yeah. And you think about how many times, the Bible says do good works, bear one another's burdens. Well, one of the things you have to do with those is, people have to be willing to let you help them, let you bear their burdens. And so this is a great opportunity that Paul points out. This is a place where you can do that.
Exactly.
Yeah,
any thoughts?
And building on that, the society that we are in now is actually quite. It's not the typical of history. I mean, it's actually fairly recent. Like, for example, the idea of Social Security. Social Security has only been around. It hadn't even been around for 100 years. But we are in a circumstance where our government does attempt to take care of those that are needy and so on from that standpoint, and we set up retirement plans and all those types of things. But if you look at the history of the world, families lived together a lot more than we do today. And by the way, that's still true in a lot of the world today. I mean, you go to a lot of countries like the Philippines, and over in that part of the world, it's still very, very common for multi-generations to live in the same home. And, you don't pass your parents off to a nursing home while you live across the country and stuff like that. The parents lived with the family, and it was a multi-generational household. That's different from our society that we live in today in a lot of instances and so on. And so bear that in mind. And you also have the idea of they did not have any safety net to fall back on at all back during that time. No Social Security. Women typically did not do work, not a lot of it. A family could get by with one income, and the man would provide the income. They were not necessarily wealthy, but they could get by with one income, and that doesn't happen now. And so basically the church steps in, and as we're about to point out, only as a last resort when all other means have been exhausted. And I think it's a rare circumstance, especially in this part of the world, in the United States of America, where the church would need to step in and relieve somebody benevolently. Not saying they can't, but as an illustration in our society, most of the time, if a brother or sister in the congregation has a need, there's another brother or sister that when they find out about it is going to help them take care of that need before it even gets close to the church treasury. Just because of the society that we live in. And if we're the family we're willing to do that. Yeah. And we'll get more into that through the lesson.
Well, yeah, and I think, Tom, a good verse to talk about that is caring for widows is pure religion, is what James says. So that's pure worship to God, is when you take care of those widows. And that's an individual thing we can all do. Like I said, if you're looking for good work, well, here's a good work you can do. And I think, as we get through, verse 4 and 5, when it talks about what the women should be doing, they should be dedicated to God. they should be those who are worshiping God, who are praying night and day, who are helping the work of the church spread, because they're dedicating themselves to God. And of course, you could probably do a whole study on that. There's probably sermons in there. Acts chapter 2, it mentions Anna worshiping in the temple when she was a widow, and she praises God when she sees Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like numerous, accounts of women who are widows that go and serve the Lord.
Right. Yeah, and that's a great point. And just building on that, Caleb, not only are they dedicated to God, they have been dedicated to God. They've given their life to it. It is
right.
Really what you see in the text. The quote unquote qualifications that we have listed here. So this is somebody whose lifelong character has been to support the church with their lives, with what they're able to do. And I think we need to factor that in. And then we know that there are some of our brethren who have misunderstandings with what the work of the church is and what the treasury can do and so on. And all that factors in. This is a very powerful passage to address that.
Okay.
I would think we maybe should be careful that if there is a Christian woman who is a widow and she does not have family to take care of her, we should not look for ways to get out of doing that. We should be ready to step up and take care of that as the church. Not looking for, is there just any other way, but instead that, and I struggle a little bit with one topic here, and I don't have the answer to it. The difference between someone who it talks about as a widow indeed, or really widows, and gives some points there, and just an older woman who is subject to benevolence, not taking her in as a widow, but just she needs help like anybody of any age might need. And I'm not sure exactly what the answer to that is. So,
well, I'm of the understanding that when it comes down to benevolence, okay, I think I see scriptural authority for short-term benevolence, separate from what we're talking about with widows there. So if you have a family who has been overloaded in, medical debt and aren't able to work, and they need, I don't see if the church has the funds, I don't have any issues with helping them. Okay. I did know a case many years ago where the men's business meeting had decided to offer a little bit of help to one family. And the next week, one of the men who was out of town came in and says, no, they need to sell their house and cars first before the church can step in to help. And that was just complete. And as a kid then, could see that being ridiculous. But, okay, the but then comes in when it becomes long-term. The only instance of long-term care for someone from the local church funds would be that of a widow, who fits that. Oftentimes people will say, now maybe if the local church doesn't have the funds, but the person should try everything possible before the church can finally step in and help them. That's not always possible. Certain needs become very immediate, when you can't go take out a loan, you can't do this or do that. And I don't have an issue, if members want to help, that's perfectly fine too. I think that gives them an opportunity as well. But I do think that the widows is the only long-term example of, other than the preacher, where the church steps in and supports them long-term. But that's my understanding on it. And doesn't seem to disagree with what y'all were saying. I was just throwing that out there. Any thoughts? So now she who is really a widow, this is the New King James now, and left alone and trusts in God and continues in supplication and prayers. First off, shouldn't that be all of our lives?
Yeah.
So I see here.
Yeah, absolutely. It should be descriptive of all of us. But the whole point is, this is somebody that has proven themselves,
faithful to the Lord.
And probably the bigger point in dealing with benevolence, and I don't think we've touched on this, is what the term that we use is general benevolence. This is a passage that argues against the church becoming, and I don't mean to be insensitive as I say this, but the church isn't a soup kitchen. The church isn't the clothes pantry. And whatever else to try to relieve the social ills of society, which is what so many people have come to assume that that's what the church is, and especially those who are continually in a needy situation. Most of us have probably had somebody that's walked in close to service times asking for money. Because I've got this need, and they don't use this terminology, but what they imply is, you're a church, and God expects you to write me a check out of the treasury to or whatever fund that you've set aside for this, because I have a need, and I've told you I have a need, and you're the church, and this is your responsibility. No, the people that the church helps, and I think this is established all throughout the New Testament. The people that the church helps are those who have been verified as brethren that have a need. They're brothers and sisters in Christ, and there's a verified need that they have. And by the way, like you made this point, John, with the exception of the widows here, it's always temporary.
Yeah.
You're not setting up a society.
It fulfills an immediate need.
Yeah, exactly. This is a fulfilling immediate need. And I've always made the point with benevolence and the responsibility of the church that the whole purpose of benevolence is because benevolence becomes a distraction to them being able to share the gospel with others. It gets in their way of living their normal lives, trying to do their best to serve God, because they've got this physical thing that has gotten in their way. And if we can help them relieve whatever that is, we can help them get back on track, serving God to the best of their ability.
Yeah. Many churches that have taken on the social programs, they also have to develop a tracking system, because there's a lot of people who abuse it. And there was one when we lived in Jonesboro, Arkansas, one of the much larger churches of Christ. I was talking to them one day. Matter of fact, what it is, we had someone come by asking for help, and I was trying to decide if I wanted to individually help him out. But I'd seen him before. He had already been there once before. And so I called them to see, how do they handle stuff like this? Because you hadn't really encountered it much. Anyway, my point is, they go as far as like take pictures of the driver's license. They tracks who comes in and out, because it becomes a repeat. It's like going to Walmart and buying stuff for food, but here you go down to the local church and get your lunch for the day, and there's no working, there's no prospering, there's nothing like that. And when the church decides to do that, aside from it being unscriptural, you're right, it creates a greater burden, and the church no longer becomes something that functions in saving the lost, but it becomes something different. Yeah.
Yeah, and by the way, if a church engages in that activity, in many instances that becomes its focus.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I mean, with the resources, because Jesus made the statement, "The poor you have with you always."
Yeah, and as individuals, we can do what we want with that.
Yeah,
help.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, and that's fine. And that's not being dismissive of the poor.
No.
Jesus is making a point is we're never going to solve. We're never going to solve the problem with poverty. And by the way, the reason why is it's not a church thing. It's an attitudinal thing with individuals. I think as prosperous as we are in the world, we could do a lot better job of solving poverty in places where it is, but there are some obstacles that get in the way. Not as the church, but as individuals. It's a heart problem.
I don't want to get political, but we've already seen that when you offer programs that offer free stuff, it is abused.
Oh, absolutely.
Abuse, very much so. Yeah. So, but these widows don't abuse things like that.
Well, that's the point. That's the point of verse 5.
Yeah.
She's really a widow, and she has proven herself. Matter of fact, getting verses 9 and 10, it even goes into greater detail the character of this person that the church is helping.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. God is a God of order. So when he gives something like this, there is a lot of detail in who a widow is, what is a widow indeed, what is her character like, and what are the warning signs of things to look out for. Because in verse 6, he gives that warning. If she's wanting for pleasure, then we need to avoid that. She's already dead. Even though she's living, she's spiritually dead, is what he's saying there in verse 6. She's wanting pleasure.
Yeah, and he elaborates on that in verse 11.
Yeah.
Yeah, but refused the younger widows. When they began to grow wanton against Christ, they desire to marry. Yeah, that's a good point. Good point. All right, any other thoughts or comments that we need to bring out as far as this particular section? I mean, you do have kind of an age thing there when he says, well, you know what? We didn't finish reading it. My bad. Paul, if you would, let's start with verse 9 and let's read through, let's go to verse 16, kind of hit the end of the section there, sir.
Hey,
Okay.
John,
go ahead, Tom.
Can I interrupt? Sorry, Paul. Before Paul actually reads, I want to make one more comment about verse 8.
Okay.
Where he makes the point, if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. If you're not stepping up to your family, who's worse than an unbeliever? I mean, that is a strong statement to say something about an individual. An unbeliever is somebody that's rejected Jesus. An unbeliever is somebody that's rejected God. And he's saying, if you're not taking care of your own when you can, in God's eyes, you're worse. You're worse than somebody who's never come into the faith in the first place. So I think that's a interesting observation there.
Well, even unbelievers recognize their family responsibilities.
Yeah, which is the point.
And if you can't see that, then you're worse than they are.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And I also tie into that James chapter 2, and what is it, about verse 16? Where you believe there's one God, you do well. Even the demons believe and tremble. Oh, that's verse 19. So I mean, is he saying, are you worse than a demon? I know that's characterizing, but the point is God expects us to take care of our family. And why is that? That's because family is the foundational unit of a society. When the family unit falls apart or implodes, society and the church are going to go. So that's the truth, right? So society interrupts.
Yeah. Well, you look at the church; it is designed to be a family, the ideal family that we should be. Because you tell that to some people, and they say, "Well, I grew up in a crummy household, and I don't want to be part of that family." Well, but the church should be the ideal family in the way that it runs.
Exactly. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that?
No. Back to Paul.
We oftentimes we use this to show that why a man should get out there and work for his family. But this, while it would apply to that, this is talking about people with parents continuing to take care of them as necessary or needed. Yeah.
He doesn't qualify, the parents being faithful either. We have a responsibility to take care of our family. There is a family responsibility out there. Does it say that though? I mean, am I wrong?
No, but you're going to upset some people who might think it does.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the Corbin
Now that doesn't
thing.
mean tolerate sin and deal with that, accordingly. But we should honor our parents.
Absolutely.
And do the best we can to take care of them.
Let's
There's
see.
exceptions to the rule, right? I mean, there is exceptions.
Yeah. Paul, let's read just verses 9 and 10. I will correct that because of our time. And Jimmy has a question we'll kind of bring in as we talk about it.
Sounds good. 1 Timothy 5, 9 and 10. I'm reading from the New King James Version. Do not let a widow under 60 years old be taken into the number, and not unless she has been the wife of one man, well reported for good works, if she has brought up children, if she has lodged strangers, if she has washed the saints' feet, if she has relieved the afflicted, if she has diligently followed every good work.
All righty. Thank you, Paul. So we'll start with the first thing there, because Jimmy asked us, can y'all please explain verse 9, where it says, do not let a widow under 60 years old be taken into the number, and not unless she has been the wife of one man. I'm assuming Jimmy's asking about the age aspect. That would be, literal.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Paul, why do you think he puts the age at 60?
Well, that's probably an age.
What was the average life expectancy?
All of us are under that number, right? None of us are. Oh, well, okay. Tom's old. Tom's old, and the rest of us are young. Now, I think that's probably a number that was given, as Paul wrote to Timothy, by the Holy Spirit, that was just a dividing line that they needed to be of that age, that she's probably not going to marry again. I'm thinking my grandfather passed away when he and my grandmother were around 60, and she stayed single all the way through 98, and then she passed. But I think that's probably an age where it's unlikely she's going to get married again. And this is just, I could just say it just says what it means, but that seems to make,
it's purely speculative.
Seems to make sense. And she's been the wife of one man, and it talks about the kind of life that she has lived and is living. And so I think that's just very, as you said, literally the age at which she can be taken into the number. And I thought maybe the question was about into the number. And it appears that in those days that they might have had multiple widows who were over 60, who were godly women, and that they needed to be taken care of. And that was an age at which they could be taken care of by the church. I think there's one translation that may say enrolled. Maybe it's the King James. And so the idea is here that it's, as you've said before, it's maybe not just a temporary relief that's provided. Any Christian could be the recipient of temporary relief, but this is specifically talking about a widow who is taken into the number that is provided for and cared for by the church.
Yeah, ongoing support.
Ongoing,
yeah.
Similar to Acts 6. Just a little bit about the Grecian widows and so forth. Yeah.
The daily ministration, that making sure that they had food. I almost called it Meals on Wheels, but that'd be chariot wheels, I guess. But regardless, making sure that they're just provided for. The widows, the Grecian widows, as well as the Jewish widows, were to be taken care of. That seems like a reasonable conclusion.
It is interesting. I always think about, Jesus. One of the last things Jesus says on earth before he dies on the cross is to take care of Mary, his mother. who was a widow, we suspect, because Joseph's not seen there.
Israel was very wicked, both the northern nation, southern nation, and how they abused the fatherless and the widows. Didn't take care of them, and the Lord oftentimes, that's parts of the reason for their captivity.
Neglect.
One question, when we look at verse 10 there, as we read a while ago, well reported for good works, and then it says, if she has brought up children, if she's lodged strangers, if she's washed the saints' feet, if she's relieved the afflicted, if she has been diligently followed every good work. Now, right off the bat, and I've got an odd question here, right off the bat, it looks like she has helped others. She's shown kindness and compassion, and so it makes sense that she would then be the recipient of kindness and compassion through the church. But when it says she has brought up children, her own, well, wait, she doesn't have any right now because she haven't even take care of her. Maybe they died. I mean, it's an interesting idea there, but if she has brought up children. Because at this point, she doesn't have anyone that can take care of her.
Right. Well, I think we're talking about somebody that's confirmed their faithfulness, like Thomas pointed out. Mm-hmm. Yeah. She's confirmed her faithfulness by what she's done. That is interesting. Well, I was looking it up, like what the average lifespan was. It was only 25 to 35 years old, they say, in the first century. So you could have all your children be dead. That's possible. And they say the wealthy could live 60 to 70. That was pretty common. So, when he says 60 years old, you are talking about somebody that is probably failing in being able to provide for themselves.
Yeah.
And they don't have any children left alive to help take care of them. Or they've abandoned them. How many times do we know people that are faithful Christians and all their kids have gone? So there is qualifications that they have shown to be good workers. It's not somebody that was converted yesterday and now they're looking to latch onto the church for support.
And this is not saying that she doesn't have children, but she doesn't have children who can take care of her or will take care of her.
Right.
Yeah. That's already established.
Yeah, exactly.
In verse 8, that was established.
And of course, we see that in Jesus correcting the Pharisees that was a problem for the Jews. They were already neglecting their elderly. Yeah. And like you pointed out, they kind of had a history of that.
Yeah.
That they had a problem with that.
It's it's an attitude of whether you're looking for why you can't or why you can. I think there.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think you bring up a good question I hadn't thought of, but if she's brought up children, why aren't they taking care of her? Well, maybe they didn't become Christians and they don't see that responsibility. And so I guess you just let her starve. That's not, that's not a right
attitude.
Not good,
yeah.
Yeah. And so, or maybe they've died. I mean, and it's interesting, the age range that Caleb mentions there that people often live to be. Well, that'd be like today. You don't have to worry about anybody unless they're over, 105. It'd be very few people that you would think are taken into that number. But
even with the qualifications he gives, it would be very few.
And very, very few. And I don't know. I've got right now a few more questions than I have answers. I know that I rarely hear of churches that have had to take a widow into the number, he says here, or enrolled. No place that I've ever worked have we had to do that. When I say had to do that, I don't mean like it was a burden. I mean, we were never approached about it. The widows that I've known who meet these qualifications have always had family that did a great job taking care of them. So.
Yeah. But times are different, and it could be if the Lord allows the world to stand another 2,000 years, societal shift may become in such a way that it becomes much more relevant again. If society was to change, collapse, and fall, or whatever, But the point is they're to be taken care of. They have no one else to take care of them. They were faithful to the Lord. They shown compassion to others, generalizing it, of course. They should be recipients of the same compassion to take care of them.
Well, I think part of it, that we talk about, these things may not be relevant to us, but that's not probably true in Africa and some of these other countries. This might be a very relevant thing for them to study. So, sometimes we look at it in our Western eyes and we kind of get lost. But when you go overseas and they're putting grains and they're putting, berries and different things that's what they've bore that week in the collection plate, we kind of forget about, the way our society is ran versus others. So God's wisdom is far beyond ours. He wrote these things out for us.
That's right. So much more we could say about that.
Yeah.
Kind of like a proverbial, can of worms, but not just that. There's a lot of directions we could go in this. But for Paul's instructions to Timothy, there would be times where the local church would have this situation, and people would want to take care of them. Well, here are the qualifications, if you would, in order for that to be authorized. Yeah. Are any other thoughts or comments? Tell you what, let's plan to continue this, Lord willing, next Thursday. Let's pick up with verse 11, and we should be able to, I was going to say get to the end of the chapter. No, not at all. But let's plan to pick up with verse 11 and continue in our study here. There's more things that he talks about, and he kind of gives an explanation as to why you don't support younger widows. He kind of builds upon that there a little bit. And it's not to impugn younger widows, but it just shows the younger widows who get married, they have other interests. They can't be like the widow who dedicates all of her time to serving the Lord. They've got other desires and other things they have to take care of, and we'll look at that. And also, so I guess a younger widow is someone 59 and under. That's probably not what he's implying there, but since he puts the limit there at 60, it's just an interesting thought.
Well, I think, it's interesting. You could have, women as young as 12, 13, 14 years old and have their husbands die. And they're, I'm going to dedicate myself to the Lord. But then, as you get older, that's a long time.
You want to get married.
And you want to have children. That desire comes along later. When your fertility starts to wane, that becomes a bigger issue.
Well, there's another aspect to that. Now, I'm glad you brought that up. Just kind of speculating here. A younger widow would have to marry someone else in order to be taken care of. So that would be her, that's once she hits elderly age and she loses her husband, her marriage prospects are probably extremely dim. And therefore, there's no one there for her to marry to take care of her. So the church then would step in. But anyone underneath that age would be, and I think one of you may have touched on it earlier, may still able to find someone who they could marry and take care of them. I mean, I'm not saying you marry to be taken care of, but that would have been a reality during that time.
So
some people
60 and over is elderly, so Tom's elderly and the rest of us are younger.
Yeah. We're about as spry as Caleb is. I don't think so. I've read somewhere that some people think Mary was younger, of course, and Joseph was considerably older than her. I don't know if there's any evidence for it other than maybe cultural, but she lived the rest of her life, as far as we know, as a widow. Unless maybe she got married later in life. I don't know. There may be some sort of tradition about that, but But anyway, we are digressing now. Any thoughts? Any comments? Okay. It's an interesting study and great applicable lessons for today, if nothing else, to show us the need to respect the elderly, to take care of our own family, to do our best to provide for them, even if they get to a point where they're older and they have no provisions, especially then, I should say. We need to be willing to do that. All right.
Yeah.
Well, any other thoughts before we close? All right, let's start at verse 11. Next week, we'll get into that a little bit more. Want to thank you so much for joining us for our study today. If you have any thoughts or questions, you can send them to us at questions@truthfactor.com or email us individually as you see on the screen there. Lord willing, we'll continue our study next week, next Thursday, 11 o'clock a.m. Central Time, picking up here in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 11, for another period of factoring the truth of God's Word into our daily lives. Appreciate it, y'all. We'll see y'all next week. Have a wonderful week.